So I usually start with an easy question, but I feel like I know you kind of well enough to get right to it. So you wrote the wonderful book, Wake Up Grateful,
Mhm.
and these are extremely challenging times in which a lot of people wake up and look at the news and think in the words of Dorothy Parker, what fresh hell is this?
Yes.
How do you hold those two realities and why try to make Wake Up Grateful in the midst of such a tough time?
So there's no easy answers. That's, always what I need to say first is that anybody who's reconciling the current realities and love of life and love, those of us who have been long in the nonprofit sector and who have been working on trying to make the world a more hospitable, justice-based, equitable, beautiful place to live are doing it because we love the world and because we love other people and we love our communities. And so, to me, I guess the big thing is not losing touch with the love that's the source for all of us, I think, of the work that we do to keep the world sane and beautiful. So waking up grateful is not easy, and it's not easy for me. And I've never had a harder time than I have in the past year. This is a really challenging time for most anybody who has a heart and skin, thin skin. And seriously, I think we are challenged to connect with that love for the world that is the motivation and the source for us of being in this work, of caring about the world, and to remember that we're grieving, I think, as a community of people who are concerned citizens. There's a lot of grief, background grief, foreground grief, internal, external, just there's a lot of grieving. And I think that's because we're losing so many things that we're incredibly grateful for. And because, we really only grieve the things that we loved and we're grateful for. So it's like, what are those things that we can stay in contact with that nourish us and that we care so deeply about. And I also think that, well, lost it. I
Hey,
lost that
welcome
thought.
back. That's
Yeah,
that's the way it is with this kind of topic, right? It's
yeah,
pretty deep stuff. Um, so let's like land it a little bit. You said that it's never been more challenging
yeah.
than this past year, which is probably true for most people, as you said. What does it actually look like for you? Like this morning,
Mhm.
what did you do to try to start off right?
I do a combination of reading the headlines every morning because it feels important for me to be informed. And I read a couple of important people. I don't know if it's important to name them, but I read an analysis. Heather Cox Richardson, I read every morning, and I read headlines so that I can know what's happening. And I may not actually put myself in front of the news almost any more times during the day than I do in the morning. And that's a practice that I commit to is I'm not on social media. I'm very pretty dogmatic and disciplined about where I put my attention. So I will put my attention on the news and knowing what's happening in the world around me so that I can make sense of being a human being in this time and not put my head in the sand. And then I light a candle. I have an altar behind me. I sit, I meditate, I write. I have a morning writing practice that is important to me. And and it's more just staying in contact with the things that move me to love the world and love the people I love and love every moment that I'm alive and to not take it for granted. That's what I was going to say before is we have to be grateful for the things that a lot of times we take for granted and we have taken for granted that we're now losing. So I think that's one of the things gratefulness for me is the opposite of taking for granted. So I live into that place where it's like what can I cherish? What can I savor? What can I nurture that I care about? And a lot of times those are things that I've thought I would never have to think about protecting in the way that I do now or engaging with.
Interesting. So there's a way in which it actually is the hardest, but also maybe the most
Most
inviting
important.
in a way, right? Most essential. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
So you catch up on the news before you do your interesting.
I do. I do. And that's a choice. And it's, I'm very ritualistic in the morning and I have to be able to sit with what's true.
Mhm.
And that is not easy. And so, I have to be honest, last month, there were a few days that I could hardly function. I was crying all the time for about 3 days. And I talked about this and I wrote a piece about it last month. I shared it freely because I think it's really important for us to know those things about each other that, the face that you see that's
Yeah.
all composed and put together is not the face that's always true. And so there's a lot of vulnerability and a lot of brokenheartedness and a lot of fear. And so I really let myself touch into that. And then it feels important to be able to sit with it. And um, the thing that I came up with after this 3 days was, oh, okay, I lost trust in myself. I was really beating myself up for having such an incredibly hard time. And losing trust in myself really broke me down. And I think it's because I right now feel so little trust in the institutions that I've often trusted to protect us before. And right now it just feels like there's so much distrust and so much to not trust around me. And I internalize that somehow. And then I felt like, oh, that's giving myself up. And so if we become cruel to ourselves and to each other, then cruelty wins. And
Mm,
so that's what I felt like I had internalized some piece of. And then I really worked hard to get to the other side of that and be able to then learn from it.
I love that. It's interesting. I have found Tara Brach's work incredibly
Yeah.
relevant in these
Yeah.
times too. And yeah, but
Because emotions matter. Emotions
and
are
how we treat
driving force.
ourselves, as you're saying,
Yes.
so
Yes.
incredibly important. So speaking of selves, I know you came to the practice of grateful living decades ago, right? After
Mhm.
a diagnosis. I wonder if you could just talk briefly about the personal journey and then kind of hone in on are the benefits that you gained personally from
Mhm.
living this practice. Do you, is there a equation to the collective? Or does it depend?
Easy. You almost asked
Scratch that
easy,
one.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so I think I learned to what it meant to treasure life. I learned what it meant to not take a single day for granted. It was the most extraordinary experience to kind of face death in my early 30s and then to learn how to live with a continued focus on taking nothing for granted. And
Mm,
that is not easy. And that really is not easy. So it's a practice that I think I'm grateful I've learned to sustain my love for the world and my love for my people and the people and our community and a love for possibility. I think that gratefulness in some ways opens up that sense of possibility. It says every moment is an opportunity and what is that opportunity in service of? And so there's something about being grateful for every moment that challenges us to really make true and make good on our concerns for the world. So, if every moment we don't take it for granted and it's an opportunity, how do we live into those moments? And that's a very big question. And
mhm,
so I think what I find now is there are a lot of people who have been really challenged by the times that we're living in and are, the possibility of burnout and how do I fill the well? How do I fill my own well? And people come to me workshops and courses and read the book. And it's wonderful to be able to say, honestly, that this is one of the things that I wrote, and I'll just say this is so important to me because it's a both and. You hold your concern for the world and your grief. And at the same time, to be able to say, when I fill my eyes with wonder and my heart with love or joy, I do not betray my concerns for the world. I nourish my capacity to attend to them. And that is my deep, deep, deep heartfelt belief that like the world really needs us to stay connected to creativity and to personal expression and to love, like loving, when it gets hard to love, love harder, that how can we make good on those things? We have to find ways to nourish our capacities. And
Mhm.
so I remember that there's times and ways in which I've often felt like I owe my hurt for the world, my despair, as opposed to I owe my hurt for the world, my joy as well.
Right.
It's like if I'm hurting for the world, how can I let myself feel joyful? I owe my despair. And then I think, how can you deny the world your joy at the same time? So for me, it's very much a both and proposition. It's not I'm grateful at the expense of all the other things. It's not having your head in the sand. It's about saying, how do we remember what is worthy of our awe and our wonder and of saving and savoring. Everything is about savoring for me, really, in my life, which is like, I never know when it's going to be my last meal. I never know when it's going to be my last interaction with someone I love. So I don't take those things for granted. And I haven't for 32 years.
Mhm.
So that's how I live. I live right
On
in
the
that
edge.
place that recognizes the impermanence of everything and the ephemeral nature of what we love. Nothing is promised to us. And so to thumb our noses at the days that we're given is really a tragedy.
This is really what I've always loved about you and your work.
Mm,
It isn't, you know, this or that, right? It
yes.
isn't grateful living light.
No, not at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
So in my own journey, especially in relationship to thinking and working around climate change, I've made this switch recently from a focus on saving the world to savoring the world. I wonder if you
yeah,
could talk a little bit about how, what the connection is that you see
mm,
between grateful living and savoring, how you would think about that.
sure. I heard an interview with Andrea Gibson, who's one of my great heroes in the whole world, just one of my favorite poets and human beings who died this past summer. And they were talking about a shift that happened when they got diagnosed with ovarian cancer that was incurable and went from being an angry activist to an activist who focused on what was beautiful about the world that was worth saving. And so their poetry started to focus on these extraordinary, miraculous kinds of truths that we so take for granted about the mammals that we're trying to protect and the animals and the earth and the resilience of the natural world, how extraordinary it is and how much we have to learn from it. And so I think biomimicry, looking at things like how do we look at the natural systems in the natural world that give us so much information about how to live and how to love the world into saving, how to save it through loving it. And I do think that we are challenged when we say that we're trying to preserve love and advance love in the world, and yet our activism doesn't look like love. I think that's a challenge that feels like it's a compromise of integrity in a way, and that we have to challenge ourselves to look at, Robin Wall Kimmerer, the Serviceberry, that, there are so many examples about how we can love the world into
Mhm.
healing. And, it's harder for me, around climate. That's an easier conversation than it is for me around some of the human beings who are in
Yeah.
charge of. And that's really, those challenges are super hard. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they are indeed. Somebody I was talking with recently said that, when she thought about the saving as the primary focus, right?
Yeah.
And fill in the blank, nature, saving people, right? Saving
Yeah.
principles we believe in, or savoring first. For her, what she heard was a difference between, ego leading, which I thought was
It
in
is interesting.
yeah,
I like that, actually. I think that, I hope I've been around long enough and certainly been an activist long enough in a variety of forms of ways of being active for what I believe in, that I also think that if we're not humbled now, this is a really humbling time. And to think that we have all the answers, it's so much more complex than I think the simplistic, more ego-based, oppositional kinds of ways of being active. And it doesn't mean to concede. It doesn't mean to give up. It just means to figure out what are the other ways. And I love the idea of savoring the world in a way that's so magnetic to other people. How do we savor the world in a way that draws people toward us and says, yes, this world is worth savoring? And I collectively, I think there's something about the collective capacity to save, to preserve, to protect. And we do that when we're grateful for things, when we're grateful for people. So the relatedness, our sense of relatedness, who we are in connection with, and the bigger our circles that we can include people in, the better. And it's not about ego, because there's nobody who's going to be out front at the stage saying, I've got all the answers and I've got the way. That's just
Right.
not, it feels out of touch.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've found really interesting is I sort of, stumbled onto the saving to savoring thing because of an E.B. White quote. I don't
Oh,
know if you
nice.
ever came across this, but
I think I saw it, but tell me what it is.
he said in an interview, 60, 70 years ago, I wake in the morning torn between a
Yeah.
desire to save the world and to savor it.
Yeah.
It makes it hard to plan the day.
Yes.
And for years and years and years, I thought that that first sentence encapsulated my experience of life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it was just this year that I woke up one
Mm.
morning. I was like, wait a minute, it's the second sentence that bears paying attention to. This makes it hard to plan the day because you're torn, right?
Yes.
Like then if you have want to choose one to put first, and we know where the saving leads to, diminishment and depletion and the rest of it. But if the
Yeah.
savoring, is rejuvenating.
Replenishing in and of itself.
Exactly. And the research
Yeah.
also shows it leads to more collective action and social,
Yes. Yeah. I, I mean, I very much agree. And I think that if we can figure out how the savoring is, how do we save ourselves, really? If we don't save ourselves, we are no good to anyone and no good to the world. And so there's something too about savoring as the path, I think, also without being self-indulgent and without being narcissistic or hedonistic or something, that to savor the world is to also, I guess, to me, it always has an active component. It isn't just enjoyment for my own sake. It's always about picking up the litter that's in the places that I love the most, that are most beautiful. I always do, beautifying and protecting and taking a stand for things that are worth saving.
right. It's engaged, you're saying.
It is
Yeah.
engaged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the obstacles that people have in, moving into either one, right? Savoring or grateful living, however one wants to think about it. I think one of the big ones is that a lot of people are concerned about seeming naive, right? That is like, are you blind to what's going on? What is
Right.
this? This is like happy face stuff. How do you think about that?
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I just don't, I think they're one and the same. And I do believe that the activism that really is most effective is an embodiment of what it
Mm.
is that we love and is an expression of what we love. So embodiment ends up being really important. And I'm very drawn to the idea of I should know what you stand for by how you live your life.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of people, it's really invisible what they stand for, and I think that's kind of a responsibility, is that it's evident in the ways that we live our lives. And that's not to be done in. I think there's something for me about the obstacle about being, that it's all smiley faces. That criticism also internally, on among our peers and among our people is really derogatory, in so many ways. And I do think it's important that there are people like Andrea Gibson who wake up from being told they're going to die, that, and, and they are so in love with the world, and that the way that it shifts in Andrea is to focus on what's worth saving, what is beautiful, what calls on us. There's something about that I think is really important when we don't take life for granted anymore. And so it's like, I'm interested in hanging out with people like that.
Yeah.
You
Right.
know, that's the people I want to walk through the streets with and the people I want to stand vigil
Mhm.
next to. And it's people who love the world and who are committed to this work from that place.
Do you think more people are moving in that
I
direction?
do. I do. I mean, I've really all the No Kings rallies and the ice rallies and things that I've been to are feel so much more, well, on one hand, kind of contemplative, like people, it feels like people are really taking it seriously. And I don't mean contemplative in this way. It just means like there's something about the presence that we're all willing to offer as we stand there that feels powerful and it feels very principled in a way. And then the No Kings rallies have been so creative and so joyful and uplifting in the name of, and there's something that I think people are starting to get their heads around, which is that is what's going to continue to draw people is when we embrace new people. There isn't one
Right.
righteous path, and the
Mhm.
righteous path isn't the angry path all the time. But, it was so great to go to the No Kings rally, the first one I went to last June, and there were so many new people who said, I've never been to a rally before. This is my first
Yeah.
rally ever. And I was like, yay.
It's interesting. It's also what the LGBTQ plus movement did so unbelievably well.
Yes,
Right?
exactly. Make it irresistible.
Right. Right. Exactly. Which grateful living is, right? I think I
Yes,
remember
I think
saying
so.
one time that that the practice actually it attracts people, right?
I think people are very drawn. I know I am. I'm a caregiver for elders who are really, at the end of their lives, and they're the most grateful people in the world. And it's like, I cannot wait to go back and spend time with people I love who are really struggling. And every single iota of effort and energy is appreciated. And that is such a reinforcement, like if instead of feeling like we can't ever do enough,
Yeah.
if we feel appreciated for what we are able to do, and what does it mean to really maybe be asked to come and show up more creatively, more in a more joyful way. I mean, people like Ross Gay are really phenomenal role models for me,
Mhm. Mhm.
and people who are looking at the situation and saying, this is a celebration of what we love.
Yeah. Yeah. It's awesome. Let me ask you about what may be a little bit of the other side of that, which is, you mentioned before about all of the grief, how much grief people are experiencing and fear,
Yeah.
anger, and all of this. And those emotions are vulnerable making,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And as a culture, we're not the best at embracing that kind of thing.
No.
So I wonder if you think that there's something that's, in a moment that's so fraught, is there something that makes it harder for some people to look at the good to and the beautiful and feel connected and move toward these kinds of things we're talking about because of a fear that it might open up those emotions and sort of maybe it feels safer to
Yeah.
keep them in a box even though that doesn't actually help.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to look squarely at what we're losing and what is lost and what we might lose. That's really painful and hard. Um, and it's incredibly vulnerable to feel those feelings and feel where they direct our attention and how they make us want to move in the world. To carry grief, it's so honest and it's so tender. And I think the truth is there's so many people who right now are feeling that, and that we're so accustomed to isolating when we feel those feelings, as opposed to how can we welcome people who are just, like I think about the mothers of the disappeared in South America, and where you come and with your veil and with your picture of the beautiful child who is no longer in your life, and you wail and you cry, that you cry because it's what's true. And so I think there's something too that we have to embrace all of that. Like the vulnerability is real, and anger, to be angry is, I think, so often on top of what we're really afraid of losing and what we're feeling sad and scared about. Angry too, obviously, but just there's also all the mix of emotions.
So how would you talk about the step toward grateful living for somebody who hasn't explored it and is
Mm.
feeling in the midst of all of that?
I think I think gratefulness is recognizing what, in the face of all of what's lost, what is still here. It's the both and. It's saying we cannot just look at what's lost. We have to look at what we have available to us. And so I think, making sure that we fill ourselves up and fill each other up. We have so much to do with each other to keep each other going. And so grateful living, I think, is very much, I love the whole this is what democracy looks like. It's about looking not just at what's lost, but preserving what we love. And so how are we preserving and protecting those things? So I think in activism, at least that's the way to do it. I think the other thing is just to be really honest in an inventory about what you're taking for granted that you have to be grateful for. And if we start doing that, it's a very big, long, dense list of things
Yeah.
that we have, our bodies, our homes, what we have that are privileges, what our good fortune is. And unless we have an honest inventory of the things that are resources and assets in our lives, the things that we love and treasure, the things that we savor, then we're really doing a disservice to the world, because only once we know what we have available to us can we do something with it, once we're honest about it. And I think a lot of people hide and don't acknowledge because they feel guilty what we have going for us. And it's, there's so many beautiful sayings, but one of them is, be grateful for the things and people you have in your life. Everything you take for granted, someone somewhere is praying for. And I think that's a really important thing, which is to say, let's not forget the privileges upon which we are making clear our love and concern for the world.
You mentioned people coming to your workshops, and is there any story that emerges from workshops that maybe you've given over the past year of someone
Hmm.
really reckoned with all of this?
Yeah, there are people who arrive in just stunning amounts of despair. And often it's personal loss that intersects with the losses in the larger world. I think right now, part of what's happening is that there isn't just personal grief and collective grief. I think it's kind of metastatic, to use a difficult word, but I think it's pretty difficult to separate. So I think of one couple who came to the most recent workshop that I did, whose 42-year-old daughter had just died in a scuba diving accident. And they were what I would call fairly well paralyzed in grief. And realizing that they could approach her, like love her, and like that missing her was also loving her, and missing what was in the world, like also they could engage more fully. And so they just come to mind. And that's not a great story, because it's just every story is kind of a transformation when people come. But I do think that's really important, this idea that the grief is not singular, and that it's pervasive and it's insidious. And so I think naming and claiming that and gathering together in the spirit of that grief is super important, because otherwise we're all walking around testy. There's a lot of emotions that are up, I think, with people. And if we can just say, I'm really grieving, I'm really struggling, that vulnerability is so critically important.
Right. Right. I'm sure we have already gone over time, and I could just keep asking you to keep talking, but two other things I want to quickly ask you about.
Sure.
One is, I know that you talk about this in the context of, grateful living and looking for the opportunity in the moment,
Yeah.
right? How would you specifically fill in the blank of the opportunity in this moment, this fraught
Hmm.
moment is?
You know, what a hard question. Thanks so much for saving that till last. Like, you know, let me just try here, which is The opportunity is to be really in touch with how much we each love the world and what we love and what we are committed to protecting and what our bottom lines are. And I think I have talked with a lot of friends to be able to say, some of us have done civil disobedience in the past, and some of us have gone to DC and have gone to New York and lots of, action, taken action. To also just the opportunity for me is really important is to know in my heart of hearts, I know there's a moment when, and if I feel called to do something, that's going to be, and to be awake enough, to be aware enough that I know when that moment is for myself. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thought I had turned off my phone. Sorry.
All good. Yeah, I probably
Does that
did.
make sense, what I just said?
Yeah, no,
To
absolutely.
be awake enough to know the opportunity is wake up, be awake, wake up to everything that you love in the world. And also when that moment is when your personal call, when you hear that siren call and know that you're meant to do something different or bigger.
As I listen to you, I'm reminded that it's almost hard to separate in you as the embodiment of this grateful living and a courageous living.
Courageous living?
Don't you think? All of this,
Yeah, I hope
right?
so. I think one of the biggest ways of being courageous is to be as vulnerable as we really all truly are. I think that's where I try to be most courageous,
Right.
to show
Okay.
up.
Last thing. I heard somebody present recently about something that really landed for me, and he showed an image of the brain and what happens
Mm,
when somebody learns one micro skill. The
mm,
whole network, lights up, right?
mm.
Yeah, fascinating. So I'm now really interested in like if you were to offer one micro skill at somebody's shop, turns this off and just practices it to see what lights up in them, what would that one simple practice be?
Mm. What comes is listen to our ancestors. Listen to your ancestors. There's something that feels really important to me about channeling wisdom in some way, trying to access wisdom and connect with it and hear it and heed it that is beyond us. So whether it's ancestors or people who are no longer here, there's a lot of people who would give anything for this day.
Mm,
And so I think to stay connected to those spirits, those energies out in the world, the people who we've loved, and I have too many who have died too young, to guidance and wisdom.
mm,
Because I know that I can connect with them. One of my friends said, stay in touch with me as she was dying.
mm,
And I thought, I wonder what that means. But I trust that she has a lot of wisdom to impart
mm.
and more than I can in my day to day. You know what I mean? I don't
Yeah.
mean that in a woo woo way. I mean, there's wisdom in our ancestors and in the generations that have come before us. And even if it's just our parents and grandparents and friends and family members who are no longer here, to how do I live? How do
Mm.
I live in these times? How do I savor the world and make sense of that when the world needs saving?
It lends a really good perspective and a broader community, right?
Yeah, it's a broader community. And also just it takes us out of our little pod
Yep.
and just says, we're part of the arc of the universe. We're part of this moral arc of the universe that is long. And like, how do we turn to the wisdom of the people who come before us
Mm,
to emulate, to embody, to heed that wisdom?
I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I won't make jokes about being grateful, but
No, please. I'm grateful to be with you and thank you for what you're doing.
thank you for what you're doing. And thank you for who you are. I mean, it's
Thank you. You
your
too.
authenticity and integrity is incredible. So
Lisa, big love.